"Sir, are you sure you want to do this?" the Secret Service agent asked, adjusting the earpiece in his ear. Donald Trump, dressed in a long black overcoat, pulled his collar up against the cold New York wind. His signature golden hair was mostly hidden beneath a baseball cap, the brim casting a shadow over his face. "Nobody needs to know. Just drive," he said, his voice firm yet quieter than usual. The armored black SUV rolled down the dimly lit streets of Manhattan. It was nearly midnight, long past the time any cameras or journalists would be lurking. This wasn't a public event. There were no press releases, no political strategy behind it. This was personal. As the car pulled up to an old, run-down building on the edge of the city, Trump took a deep breath. The place was barely standing. Cracked bricks, flickering neon lights, and a faded sign that read, "Hope Haven Shelter." "He's inside, sir," the agent confirmed, scanning the perimeter. Trump stepped out of the car, his polished shoes landing on the uneven pavement. Without a word, he pushed open the heavy doors of the shelter. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of coffee, old newspapers, and something else. Desperation. And there, in the far corner, sitting alone at a wobbly table, was the man he had come to see, a man who once saved his life. "Do you like this opening? It sets up mystery, emotion, and high stakes right away. Let me know if you want any tweaks before I continue," you said. Trump stood at the entrance for a moment, his sharp blue eyes scanning the dimly lit room. The shelter was quiet, except for the occasional cough or the rustling of blankets. The man at the table hadn't noticed him yet. He sat hunched over a steaming cup of coffee, his rough hands trembling slightly as he held it. His face was weathered, lined with years of struggle. His clothes were tattered, but his posture still held a trace of dignity. Trump took a deep breath and stepped forward. "It's been a long time, John." The man's head jerked up, his deep-set eyes widening in shock. For a moment he just stared, his mouth slightly open, as if struggling to believe what he was seeing. "Mr. Trump," he finally whispered, his voice raspy. Trump nodded, pulling out the chair across from him and sitting down. "I had to find you," Trump said. "I never forgot." John blinked rapidly, as if clearing away years of hardship and disbelief. He swallowed hard and looked down at his trembling hands. You remember?" Trump leaned in slightly, his expression serious. "You saved my life, John, and now I'm here to return the favor." John exhaled sharply, his eyes glistening with emotion. The weight of forgotten years hung between them. The past was about to come rushing back. John let out a shaky breath, his fingers tightening around the chipped coffee mug. He looked down, as if trying to piece together a memory long buried under years of hardship. I don't understand," he muttered, shaking his head. "That was a lifetime ago. I never thought you'd even remember me, let alone come looking." Trump leaned back in his chair, studying the man across from him. "I don't forget the people who've helped me," he said simply, "especially when they put their own life on the line." John gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "That was just doing my job." Trump's expression hardened. "No, John, that was more than a job. You risked everything for me that night." John's hands trembled as he set the mug down. The shelter's overhead light buzzed softly, casting shadows on the walls. The weight of Trump's words lingered between them. Finally, John exhaled, rubbing a hand over his unshaven face. "You want to tell me why you're here, after all these years?" Trump reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a neatly folded check. He placed it on the table and slid it toward John. John hesitated before picking it up. His breath hitched, his hands clenched. The number was life-changing. His eyes darted back to Trump, disbelief written all over his face. I can't take this," John stammered. Trump held up a hand. You can, and you will. John swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he stared at the check. Why now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Trump's gaze didn't waver. Because I owe you a debt, John, and I always pay what I owe. The air between them was thick with emotion, but John wasn't ready to accept it. Not yet. I don't need charity, Mr. Trump, he said gruffly, pushing the check back. Trump smirked. Good, because this isn't charity. It's justice. John looked away, his jaw tightening. He wanted to refuse, to hold on to his pride, but deep down, he knew. This was the second chance he never thought he'd get. And Trump wasn't leaving until he took it. John's grip on the check tightened, as if holding on to it burned his fingers. His chest rose and fell in short, labored breaths. The weight of his past, the years of struggle, the cold nights on the streets. It all flashed before him. I don't take handouts, he muttered, his voice thick with stubborn pride. Trump chuckled, shaking his head. That's what I always liked about you, John. You were never the kind of man to take the easy way out. John's jaw clenched. Then why are you here trying to force me? Trump leaned forward, elbows on the table. Because this isn't about charity. It's about you getting what you deserve. He motioned to the check. You didn't think I'd forget, did you? You saved my life. Now, it's my turn to return the favor. John's eyes glistened, but he quickly blinked away the moisture. I didn't do it for a reward, he whispered. I know, Trump said, his voice softer now. That's why you deserve it even more. John shook his head, his rough hands sliding the check back across the table. Money doesn't fix everything. Trump sighed, tilting his head. No, but it can help. He paused, letting his words sink in. What would you do with it? John hesitated. He didn't want to admit it, but he already knew. I'd get a place, get off the streets. Maybe even see my daughter again, he finally confessed. Trump nodded. Then take it. Not because it's from me, but because you deserve that chance. John's fingers twitched. The battle between pride and survival waged inside him. After a long silence, he exhaled deeply, and this time, he didn't push the check away. John sat frozen, staring at the check as if it held the weight of every wrong turn in his life. His fingers traced the edges, his thoughts swirling. My daughter, he murmured, almost to himself. Trump raised an eyebrow. You haven't seen her in a while, have you? John swallowed hard. Not in years. He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his unshaven face. Last time I saw her, she was still in high school. She used to look up to me, you know? He chuckled bitterly. Thought I was some kind of hero. Trump's gaze stayed steady. Maybe she still does. John scoffed. Yeah? Hard to be a hero when you're sleeping on benches. He shook his head. She probably thinks I abandoned her. And maybe she's right. Trump leaned back, folding his arms. Why'd you leave? John sighed, his shoulders sagging. Wasn't my choice. Lost my job, then my apartment. I told myself I'd get back on my feet before seeing her again. He clenched his jaw. That was 6 years ago. Trump nodded slowly, letting the silence settle. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something else. An old folded piece of paper. I think you should see this. John hesitated before taking it. His rough fingers unfolded the worn paper, his heart pounding as he read the first few words. His breath caught. It was a letter from his daughter. Dad, I don't care where you are. I just want to see you. I miss you. I still love you. John's hands trembled. He clenched his jaw, trying to fight the lump in his throat. Where did you get this? He whispered. Trump smirked. Let's just say I have my ways. John looked up, his eyes filled with something Trump hadn't seen before. Hope. And for the first time in years, John knew exactly what he had to do. John sat in stunned silence, his calloused fingers gripping the letter like it was the most precious thing in the world. His eyes moved over the words again, reading them over and over as if afraid they'd disappear. "She still wants to see me," he whispered. Trump nodded. "She never stopped." John exhaled shakily, rubbing his face. "I don't deserve this." Trump frowned. "John, listen to me. You made mistakes, sure, but running away from your past won't fix anything. You still have a chance to make things right." He motioned toward the check. "Take it. Use it to get back on your feet. Find her." John hesitated. The weight of his pride was a heavy burden, but for the first time in years, he saw a path forward. He swallowed hard, then slowly reached for the check. "I don't want a handout," he muttered, his grip tightening around the paper. "But if this is a second chance, I'd be a fool to turn it down." Trump smirked. "Now you're talking." John glanced at the letter again, his heart hammering. The thought of seeing his daughter after all these years sent a mix of fear and excitement coursing through him. "Where is she?" he asked. Trump pulled out his phone, tapped a few buttons, then slid it across the table. "She's waiting for you." John's eyes widened. On the screen was a familiar face. His daughter, now a grown woman, standing outside a small cafe with a nervous smile. His throat tightened. "She came?" Trump grinned. "Of course she did. She never gave up on you, John. Now don't make her wait any longer." John let out a breath, pushing back his chair. His legs felt unsteady, but his resolve had never been stronger. "I need to go." Trump nodded. "Then go." "And John?" John turned back. "Don't look back. Just move forward." With one final glance at the letter, John nodded. And for the first time in years, he walked towards something instead of away. John stepped out of the hotel, the cold air biting at his skin, but he barely noticed. His heart was hammering, his mind racing. Every step toward the cafe felt heavier than the last. What if she's angry? What if she doesn't want to see me after all? What if I've already lost her? The weight of his past mistakes pressed down on him. But then he remembered Trump's words. Don't look back. Just move forward. So he did. The cafe came into view, its warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. And there, standing near the entrance, was his daughter. She looked different, older, more mature. But her eyes, those were still the same. The same eyes that used to light up when he came home from work. The same eyes that once trusted him. John's legs nearly gave out. He wanted to run to her, to hug her, to drop to his knees and beg for forgiveness. But he didn't know if he deserved that yet. Taking a shaky breath, he walked closer. She hadn't seen him yet. She was staring down at her phone, shifting nervously from foot to foot. He stopped a few feet away and swallowed hard. "Emily!" Her head snapped up. For a moment there was silence. Then her eyes widened. "Dad?" John's breath hitched. Hearing that word again after so many years nearly shattered him. "Yeah, sweetheart, it's me." Tears welled up in her eyes. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then she ran to him. John barely had time to react before she threw her arms around him, holding him so tightly it nearly knocked the wind out of him. "I thought you were gone forever," she whispered, her voice breaking. John squeezed his eyes shut, his arms wrapping around her like he was afraid to let go. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I never meant to leave you. I was lost." She pulled back just enough to look at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "I don't care about the past, Dad. I just care that you're here now." John let out a shaky laugh, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm here, and I'm never leaving again." She smiled, nodding, as more tears spilled over. For the first time in years, John felt like he belonged somewhere, and in that moment he knew he had been given a second chance, and he wouldn't waste it. John and Emily sat inside the cafe, the warmth of the room wrapping around them like a long-lost embrace. The hum of quiet conversations and the clinking of coffee cups filled the air. But John only focused on one thing: his daughter. She was right in front of him, sipping from a mug, her eyes never leaving his. "So, tell me everything," she said with a soft smile. John chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Everything, huh? That might take a while." "I've got time." Her words nearly undid him. For years he thought he had lost this, lost her. But here she was, sitting across from him, waiting, willing to listen. He took a deep breath. "I messed up, Emily. After your mother died, I didn't know how to handle it. I should have been stronger for you. But instead I ran. I thought I was doing the right thing, that maybe you'd be better off without me." Emily frowned. "That's not true, Dad. I needed you. I needed my father." John's chest ached. He reached across the table, hesitating before gently taking her hand. "I know, and I can never make up for all the years I lost. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try." Emily studied him for a long moment. Then she squeezed his hand. "I want that too." John felt something deep inside him crack open, a pain he had carried for years, finally releasing. The door to the cafe suddenly opened and a gust of cold air swept in. John glanced up instinctively, only to see a familiar figure standing in the doorway. Donald Trump. John's eyes widened. Trump smirked. "Well, don't just sit there looking shocked. How'd it go?" Emily turned in surprise. "Wait, you know Mr. Trump?" John let out a breathless laugh. "It's a long story." Trump walked over to the table, clapping a hand on John's shoulder. "Told you it wasn't too late?" John nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, you did." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Did he help you find me?" John chuckled. "Let's just say, he gave me the push I needed." Trump smirked. "And a little cash to keep you on your feet. Don't waste it." John nodded solemnly. "I won't." Trump looked between the two of them, then nodded. "Good. Now, I'll leave you two to catch up. Just don't forget, second chances are rare. Don't blow this one." John met his gaze, and for the first time in years, felt something he had long forgotten. Hope. "I won't. I promise." Trump nodded once more, then turned to leave. As he stepped outside, the cold wind howled, but inside, warmth remained. Emily smiled at John. "So, you hungry?" John laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "Starving." And just like that, a new chapter in his life began. A chapter he never thought he'd get, but one he would cherish forever.